So, I look at this story down in Bessemer, Alabama, and it's one of those things, as someone who has worked to help people join and form unions in the past, and some of the obstacles that are in place. It's one of those things that I'm watching these stories come out of Alabama, and the amount of power that Amazon has, the amount of control, the fact that they're hiring disorganizers and paying individuals $10,000 a day to tell workers that somehow, paying 2 hours of a month of their paycheck for representation is a horrible thing, and the unions just want their money. It is quite remarkable to me. And I've spent a lot of time here recently, especially recently, because it's my view that Pennsylvania is on the target list to be the next right-to-work state. I know all of the right-wing groups are just all Twitter over the possibilities of moving Pennsylvania into a state where, like Wisconsin, and Wisconsin's a perfect lesson for what could happen here in 2023 if you get a Republican governor elected in 22. And what happens when those institutions are destroyed? What happens when workers have an even more difficult time of organizing and holding on to their unions as these companies get much, much more aggressive in their avoidance, in their busting? And, this is one of those things that, no matter what your political background is, every working person should be in favor of being a member of a union, because it comes down to a contract. It comes down to laying out what your work description is. It comes down to what the costs of things are. It comes down to, what the wages, the hours, the conditions, all of that come down to. And it's one of those things where you back this up and you look at the fact that the pendulum has swung so far to the side of employers, so far to the side of the union busters, so far to the extreme that something has to be done. And I look at what's going on in Bessemer right now, the fact that you can't even go to the bathroom without being assaulted with anti-union propaganda, that they had the power to get the city to change the street lights, to change faster, to get people through, so those organizers who are standing outside don't have a moment to talk with somebody. That's power. And one of the guys down there working on the stories that are happening is Dave Jamieson. He's a labor reporter with Huffington Post. Dave, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Brooke. Good to talk with you.
So, I'm looking at this story that's going on down in Alabama, and I'm hopeful. A month ago, I would have said that there was no chance. I'm in the position now that I'm hopeful that a positive outcome comes at the end of the month. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, it's look, any union is going to be a big underdog here. I mean, Amazon is just a extremely powerful company, extremely anti-union, as we know. And it's a huge bargaining unit. There's a lot of challenges. There's really high turnover. There's lots of reasons that this is really daunting for the union. I will say, though, after spending a few days down there, I saw a lot of energy. They're running full throttle. There's 2 weeks left in this thing. Like you, I thought, on paper, this is a tough one to pull off. But, having seen what they're doing, I think I'm going to be a little less surprised if they do happen to pull it out.
No, and I'm excited, and I'm hoping that they do. But here's one of the more bizarre things that I've had someone tell me is that, well, the union just wants to force the people of Alabama to pay dues, and at this moment, Alabama is a right-to-work state. No, you can't force them to join the union, which is one of the weirder arguments that I've seen come out of this.
Yeah, it is. Amazon has made this, much of it about dues, the the slogan they came up with is "Do it without dues." Of course, as you know, they wouldn't be required to pay any fees to the union if the RW does win the election. It's an interesting argument for the company to be making, but you also hear other the same kinds of messages you hear in any campaign, where supervisors are saying, that it's going to disrupt things, it's going to complicate the work, really all the kind of normal things we hear. And one thing I've been trying to convey to people is that there's really nothing extraordinary about the anti-campaign here that Amazon's running. It's really just kind of the normal playbook. I think it's been scaled up because of the size of the bargaining unit. We're talking about almost 6,000 workers. And it's going to be a while before we know how much money Amazon is actually spending here, because it takes a long time for these disclosures to come out through the Labor Department. But we do know, they have one firm where they're paying $3,000 a pop on each consultant per day. For that firm, it could be, looks like maybe around $10,000 per day. Another firm that hasn't disclosed the fees. There does seem to be quite a bit of consultants, still there in the facility. They're not doing captive audience meetings the way they were earlier. That's because the election is happening now. You can't do that. This is a very unusual situation to have such a long mail-in ballot period. It's 7 weeks of voting. So it's an unusual situation, but what we're seeing out of Amazon is really pretty typical.
No, so you think it's typical? I had someone tell me that there are people walking through the warehouse with sandwich boards with anti-union propaganda on it. I don't know. Is that typical?
I have not heard the sandwich boards anecdote. What I'm hearing is at this point it's one-on-one meetings. Supervisor swings by the workstation, maybe pulls you aside. You got your ballot. You need help on anything. It's that sort of game, which I do think is quite common. And the firms they've brought in, it's the same consultants that show up in a lot of in a lot of campaigns. They had Morgan Lewis handling the litigation and likely advising them on a lot of this stuff. So yeah, I do think it's typical. One thing that organizers told me is they do feel like it is like it is pretty sophisticated though, and that the company that they have been to some degree effective with this, and so it takes a lot of work on the union's part to try to counter that.
Now, you had a story out here recently about the organizers who have been camped out in the entrance for the last 5 months. I looked at that and go, wow, that, having done some of that myself in the past, I know the dedication it takes, but for 5 full months, that's dedication.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. This is kind of a common feature in sort of industrial campaigns where, you're trying to do this face-to-face contact with workers and you can't get into the facility, obviously. You don't have a legal right to be in there. So you're trying to do all of this from the outside. And, I talked to people who've been there since the beginning, and they were there, in the winter when it was freezing cold out. Early on, they were there 24 hours a day, because you have multiple shift changes at the warehouse. And they didn't want workers to come out and not see anybody there. Eventually they scaled that back, and they're focusing mostly on shift changes now. But the idea, and that they're going to be there through the election, is they don't want workers to come out and think that they collected union cards and then headed out. So it's to show dedication, to show that they're going to be in there for the long haul, and I think that's the message they're trying to convey to people.
Now you've been reporting on this stuff a long time. You're in my opinion, one of the top 2 or 3 labor reporters in the country. In looking at this, why was Bessemer chosen as the place to go after Amazon? Weren't there better targets, you think?
Well, I appreciate the compliment, Rick. It is. I'm working on a piece now that kind of tries to unpack some of this. For one, I don't think it was chosen. I mean, I think it really kind of came to the union here. This is what we call a hot shop. this warehouse had not been open very long, really just a few months, during COVID. There were problems there, it seems. And, the union is active down there. They represent a lot of poultry plants in Alabama. I know there are workers in this plant who had worked, several dozen who'd been at a plastics manufacturer nearby, where they had been represented by the RW, and then they were working at Amazon. And people tend to forget it. It seems weird from the outside that this would be happening in Alabama, that we would see kind of the first really big, viable effort at unionizing an Amazon facility wall to wall, that we'd see it happening in the Deep South. But keep in mind that the union density is pretty good down there, actually. It's I'd have to check the numbers again, but it's maybe the best in the South, or among the best in the South. When you look at Alabama, it's often, comparable to states more in the Midwest or Northeast. And there's a long history of textile and manufacturing unions, in and around Bessemer. So, I keep hearing again and again is in talking to some of the worker leaders who are trying to lead the charge on the union campaign, a bunch of them were in union shops elsewhere, UAW, steel workers, stuff like that. So there's familiarity with unions, how they operate, people who've been in collective bargaining before. And so I think it's kind of not shocking when you look at a lot of that this could be happening there. And I think that could be a big factor if the union manages to pull this out. It's sort of the union roots that are there, talking to people who are on the phones a lot, talking to workers. They say, a lot of the pro-union workers will say, my uncle said I got to vote for the union. My grandma, she was in a union. She said I got to vote for the union. So it's a factor there. If you don't know this area, it might seem strange, but that's the reality.
So what you're telling me is there's a culture of it there that may not be in other places. So this is, because when I first heard, I'm going, wow. And then I looked on the map. I go, oh, it's near Birmingham. Makes a little bit of sense because I do know that there's a good union presence there in Birmingham, and it kind of put into pieces what you said. So it kind of makes sense. Are you making any predictions? Any thoughts?
I don't. I don't. As you know, there's no polls on this stuff. I'm not going to go out there on a limb,
right?
And make any predictions. I would caution. And look, people like me are out there writing lots of stuff on this because there's tons of interest in it, and I think people, on the left are really itching for a big victory. Particularly in the South, let alone against Amazon. What I try to remind people is how quickly this came together, and sometimes it takes a few cracks at the apple here. You look at something like when the USCW unionized, Smithfield in Tar Heel, North Carolina. That's a campaign that's been on some people's minds. That took 3 tries and many years before they were able to successfully do it. Maybe the union will pull it out here. Maybe they won't. And if they don't, maybe they're building something longer term there. And we also know, we're also already seeing that there's a lot of interest coming from other Amazon warehouses too. Teamsters are working on stuff too. And we know the RW has had union cards come in from places all over. So, win or lose, maybe this is the start of something.
Yeah, but here's the thing, and this is where I come back to. It shouldn't be this difficult. People shouldn't have to go through these extreme measures and this kind of constant harassment. Just if they do have the right to organize, if they do have the right to collective bargaining, it shouldn't be this difficult.
It is interesting to see the level of attention that this has brought onto the process, especially when you it coincides with a lot of excitement on the left over the possibility of the PRO Act passing, and people just becoming more aware of really how this playing field works, the access to employees that employers have and that unions do not have, and it's really an uphill battle, especially when you look at a union taking on an employer of Amazon size and a unit of this size. One thing that struck me that I really kind of came to grasp while I was down there is just the struggle that turnover presents. Amazon, these are high turnover facilities, and a lot of us, knew that, well before, and the challenges that poses to organizing. But I mean, this union, a lot of the cards that they got signed back in the fall, plenty of those workers wouldn't even be around now to vote in the election. That's the reality of it, because some people are in and out of these places, and that becomes, really hard to build a long-term campaign when you're just kind of constantly treading water like that.
Right.
So, it's another reason that this is, an enormous challenge. And I think I tell people that even getting, the union says they got 3,000 plus cards signed, out of a facility of 6,000. And one reason, they say they didn't try to do more was just because you gotta move at some point, when you're fighting this turnover anyway. So I think, it's kind of remarkable that they were able to get that many cars to begin with.
No, I'm right there with you. But for me, in looking at this, and I'm anxiously awaiting the results at the end of the month. This just magnifies my belief that we need to have comprehensive labor law reform, and regardless of what the outcome is, this shouldn't be this difficult. And I'm glad to see that Joe Biden came out and gave a statement in a very historic fashion.
Absolutely, and it was a tremendous deal. When you look at really not just recent Democratic presidents, but going back through the decades, it's pretty unprecedented to see him. And of course, he didn't name Amazon, and I think they had their reasons for him not doing that. But I think his message came across quite clear that he was talking about what was going on in Alabama, and that he thought employers need to stop doing this stuff. They need to stop the captive audience meetings. They should not meddle in this, and that the decision should be left to the workers. So I think coming from the Oval Office, it was a really, really powerful message.
Yeah, but for me, I come back to the fact that they're not going to stop doing it because they can, which is why we need to make sure that they can't. It's just my view. But Dave, I appreciate the time, the work you do, outstanding reporting. I love the stuff you do. If you want to check out Dave's work, we'll make sure we get links out on social media. His most recent piece, "The Battle to Unionize Amazon's Alabama Warehouse," started right here. We'll get links out so you can take a look at that. Dave, as always, I appreciate the time, man.
Always great talking with you, Rick. Take care.
Good stuff. Thanks so much. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.